Sandwiches were once a staple in every American home. Simple, satisfying, and full of memories. Over the years, people's tastes shifted, trends changed, and many of those classic recipes were quietly forgotten. But some still live on in memory. And today, we're bringing back 15 old-fashioned sandwiches that truly deserve a second chance. Let's start with the Monte Cristo, the sandwich that couldn't decide if it wanted to be breakfast, lunch, or dessert. So it said, why not all three? This French toast imposter stuffed with ham, turkey, and Swiss cheese was the fancy cousin at every family reunion. Born in fancy hotel dining rooms, it made its way to every corner diner, where short-order cooks would dust it with powdered sugar, as if blessing it. Once you took a bite, you'd understand why it needed a nap afterward. It was an experience that required both a fork and forgiveness from your cardiologist. But not all sandwiches were fancy or sweet. Some were simple, made from leftovers, and packed with care by someone who loved you. Meatloaf sandwich. Now, the meatloaf sandwich was a pure example of American resourceful cooking, where nothing ever goes to waste. Your mother probably took Sunday's leftover meatloaf and turned it into Monday's lunch. You might not know how it tasted better the next day, but you'll remember slicing it thick, slapping it between two pieces of white bread with a dollop of ketchup. Back then, there wasn't a lot of good, honest food, and a cold meatloaf sandwich didn't need to impress anyone. It just needed to fill you up and remind you that nothing beats a home-cooked meal, especially if it was made by mom. But when you weren't eating leftovers at home, you might have found yourself at a lunch counter, looking for something hot, hearty, and made fresh to order. That happy accident became the sandwich that is like communion for the working class, and you might remember not eating it tidily. You had to lean over your plate, roll up your sleeves, and napkin tucked in your collar like a bib. Every bite was a little baptism in beef juice, and every dinner had at least one person who'd finish their sandwich. Pastrami on rye. This old goodie wasn't just a sandwich. It was a cultural institution that came with its own set of rules, especially if you walked into Katz's Delicatessen on the Lower East Side. You didn't order pastrami on white bread any more than you'd wear a tuxedo to a barbecue. It had to be on rye, preferably with seeds, and it had to be piled so high you needed an engineering degree to figure out how to take a bite. The pastrami itself was a work of art in the form of beef brisket, seasoned and smoked until it developed more character than most people. Add a smear of mustard, maybe some pickles, and you have a sandwich that could make grown folks cry tears of joy as they crunch that bite. And while New York had its pastrami, Buffalo had a bold answer of its own, one that packed just as much flavor and even more punch. They gave us the beef on a weck, and if you've never had one, you're missing out on one of America's best-kept secrets. But honestly, why is it that the best food always comes from the places tourists never think to visit? Folks would take a Kummelweck roll and stuff it with thin-sliced roast beef and horseradish that could clear your sinuses from 3 counties away, and the result wasn't food for the faint of heart. The roll was crusty enough to cut your mouth, the beef was tender enough to make you forget your troubles, and the horseradish was strong enough to wake the dead. It was blue-collar food for blue-collar people who knew the difference between eating and dining. Head a little farther south, and you'll find another local legend, built over open flames in backyards. Pit beef sandwich. This old-fashioned sandwich was the kind that made you understand why people fought wars. Down in Baltimore, they knew how to turn a cheap cut of beef into comfort food. The pit beef sandwich was born in the working-class neighborhoods where every corner had a guy with a charcoal grill and a bag full of dreams. Pit beef stands in Baltimore were usually run by one grill master, and every man had his way of doing things. They'd smoke the meat over a charcoal fire, then slice and pile it high on a Kaiser roll with some raw onion and horseradish. Back then, men had calloused hands and knew the difference between a job and a calling. However, not every sandwich was smoky. Some were carefully stacked high with layers of flavor and made to impress, especially this next old-fashioned sandwich you haven't thought about in years. The club sandwich was the aristocrat of the sandwich world, a three-story of pure American old-fashioned cooking that required skill to cook and courage to eat. You'll remember it with layer upon layer of turkey, bacon, lettuce, tomato, and mayo, held together with toothpicks like a delicious house of cards. Legend says it was invented in a gentleman's club, which makes sense because you needed the refined table manners of a gentleman to eat one without making a complete mess of yourself. The bread had to be toasted well, the bacon had to be crispy enough, and the toothpicks had to be placed with the precision of a master architect. But what happened to food that required actual effort to eat properly? And just when you thought sandwiches were old-fashioned, then came one that was bold and unapologetically rich. Corned beef or Reuben? A sandwich that was the result of someone taking perfectly good corned beef and deciding it needed sauerkraut, Swiss cheese, and Russian dressing on rye bread, all grilled together. Some say it was invented in New York, others claim Nebraska. But honestly, it doesn't matter where it came from. What matters is where it took you. One bite, and you were transported to a different time when delis were neighborhood institutions, and sandwiches were built by hand, not assembled by machines. The tangy sauerkraut cut through the rich corned beef, the Swiss cheese melted along with it, while the Russian dressing tied it all together like an edible love letter. It was the kind of sandwich that made you close your eyes and make little sounds of happiness. For many folks, the Reuben sandwich was therapy, comfort food, and joy all wrapped up in rye bread. But can you imagine a time when every sandwich told the story of someone's journey to America? The Cuban sandwich was a taste of Havana, born right in Tampa's Ybor City. Cuban immigrants, alongside Spanish and Italian workers, made this old-fashioned sandwich with ham, roasted pork, Swiss cheese, pickles, and mustard, layered on fresh Cuban bread. Then they pressed it flat on a plancha until it was warm, crispy, and perfect. Back then, folks would argue whether it came from Cuba, but we all agreed it carried the flavors and spirit of home. Every bite delivered salty ham, tender pork, and melted cheese held together by heritage and hunger. It was the sandwich equivalent of a warm hug from a Cuban grandmother, even if you didn't have one. But not every old-fashioned sandwich needed a pork or press. Some needed a garden and patience. Tomato sandwich, a sandwich that had ripened tomatoes on white bread, with a generous smear of mayonnaise and a sprinkle of salt and pepper. Your mother probably told you it was simple, almost too simple. And that was the beauty of it. You couldn't make a proper tomato sandwich in February with those pale, tasteless imposters from the grocery store. No, this sandwich required August tomatoes, the kind that was so ripe they'd split their skin just from growing, so juicy they'd soak through the bread if you weren't careful. Your grandmother knew to salt the tomatoes first and let them weep out their excess moisture because a soggy tomato sandwich was a culinary offense of the highest order. And when mothers had 5 kids, $2, and enough heart to hold a whole family together, you couldn't stop them from feeding a family with nothing but willpower and a frying pan. That's the story with Po' Boy, a sandwich born from necessity during the Great Depression, when poor boys needed food to get them through the day. Back in the day, New Orleans folks took French bread, split it open, and stuffed it with fried oysters, shrimp, catfish, roast beef, or anything they had. The bread was crucial. It had to be New Orleans French bread because it was perfect for soaking up all those dressed mint lettuce, tomatoes, pickles, and mayo. And if you ordered it any other way, you'd get looks from the sandwich maker that could melt steel. The Po' Boy was proof that turning limitations into liberation is possible. It was working-class food with upper-class taste. Grilled cheese. Another old-fashioned sandwich that was a childhood memory of wrapped golden bread with cheese stretching like heartstrings when you pulled it apart. It was the first sandwich most of us learned to make, standing on a step stool next to our mothers, watching butter sizzle in the pan like tiny fireworks. The perfect grilled cheese was an art form. The bread had to be golden brown, not burned. The cheese had to be melted all the way through, and there had to be that perfect crispy crunch when you bit into it. It was comfort food at its finest, the sandwich equivalent of a warm blanket on a cold day. paired with a bowl of tomato soup. It was the lunch that could fix a bad day, a broken heart, or just life being unfair to a hungry 8-year-old. And when America had one television, 3 channels, and enough optimism to fuel a rocket ship to the moon, but needed a lunch that had more swagger, we turned to peanut butter, bananas, and a rock star who wasn't afraid to try new things. Elvis knew what he was doing when he made the peanut butter and banana sandwich famous down in Memphis. Take 2 slices of white bread and slather them with enough peanut butter, sliced bananas, and a drizzle of honey. It became the sandwich that bridged the gap between meal and dessert, sweet enough to be candy but substantial enough to call lunch. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had many talents, but maybe his greatest contribution to American culture was peanut butter and banana. Tuna melt. This was the sophisticated old-fashioned cousin of the regular tuna sandwich that went to college and came back with ideas above its station. It became the good stuff, made with real mayonnaise and chopped celery for crunch. Your mother would pile it on bread, top it with a slice of cheese, and slide it under the broiler until it bubbled and browned like the golden edge of a winter sunrise. She knew how to get the balance right by adding enough tuna to make it substantial, enough cheese to make it indulgent, and enough heat to melt it all together. It was the kind of sandwich that reminded folks that the best things in life come to those who eat. But, if I may ask, when was the last time you took a perfectly good food and made it better just because you could? And when dinner came from a can, a pound of ground beef, enough love to make it taste like gourmet cuisine, then you'll remember Sloppy Joe, the sandwich that came with its own warning label. You had to wear old clothes, have napkins ready, and don't even think about eating it on a first date. Ground beef simmered in a sweet and tangy sauce, piled high on a hamburger bun that was doing its best to hold everything together, but was outmatched. The sauce was sweet enough to make kids happy, with just enough tomato and spice to make the adults not feel like they were eating candy for dinner. The beef mixture would drip down your chin, and that just made them taste even better. It was messy and chaotic, and it was perfect for an old-fashioned sandwich. Peanut butter and jelly. Do you remember your lunchbox, when lunch was whatever your mom packed? The peanut butter and jelly sandwich was pure American democracy, available to everyone, loved by all, and perfect in its simplicity. It was the sandwich that was packed in 1 million school lunchboxes back in the day, and the comfort food that never went out of style. Your mom was a genius with this one, and you loved her peanut butter on both slices of bread. Grape jelly was traditional, but strawberry was acceptable, and if you used anything else, well, you were probably from California. Some kids hated the crusts and demanded that they be cut off, while others insisted it be sliced on the diagonal, because that made it taste better. Too much peanut butter, and you'd need a glass of milk to wash it down. Too much jelly, and you'd have a sticky disaster on your hands. And if your lunchbox got jostled on the bus, you'd open it to find a flattened sandwich clinging to the wax paper like it had lost the will to live. But for some kids, PB&J was the first thing they learned to make on their own. A small act of independence, maybe even survival. When life at home was unpredictable, if you knew how to make a peanut butter and jelly and the ingredients were there, you wouldn't go hungry. It was a comfort food in more ways than one that gave you an advantage in a world that didn't always make sense. Even today, people go back to it because it's a reminder of something simple and steady you could count on. Which of these old-fashioned sandwiches brought back your favorite memory? Are there ones you preferred that we didn't mention in this video? Do let us know. Until next time, celebrate American nostalgia and let every sandwich tell a story.